Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Hello, good morning, everyone. It's my great pleasure to have Yanis here. Yanis is a PhD student in the CS department of UW. He is working with Professor Anna Karlin, and his area is theory and algorithms. So more recently, he has been working on sponsored search auctions. So without further ado, let's hear what he has to say. Thank you.
All right, thanks. So before we begin, I wasn't really certain on what to expect in terms of the audience and what people would be interested in. My talk is, if you've seen the abstract, the talk is going to be mainly on bidding strategies in keyword auctions. I've just threw in a couple of slides about some other stuff we're working at UW with my advisor, Anna. And this work was joint work with this very nice group of people. Some of you might know Claire. She was here like a couple of months ago. Please, I'm not going to make a lot of assumptions about like how much you know regarding game theory or even advertising or anything like that. I would like to keep it a little informal in the sense that please stop me if you have any questions, if you don't understand anything, and if I'm going too fast. I might try to skip a couple of slides if it looks like you're understanding the notions. But okay, let's get started. So basically, if you take a look at internet advertising, there have been a lot of forms of internet advertising. We had spam emails, we went to like web banners and all that. And at some point around 98, there came this concept where you would have advertisements on a web page that were somehow related to the content of the web page. This started back in the day with, I believe, Overture was the company that was doing something like that. And well, if what I've been reading is right, the way they were doing it at that point was that they actually had people that would manually select the advertisements and embed them in the web pages to which they thought they were relevant. Of course, that's not very satisfying. And as all forms, I guess, of internet advertising, it has inspired a lot of great research on how to do this better and what we can get out of it. So I'm pretty sure you're all familiar with a picture like this. And the idea here is that when you make a, what happens these days is that when you make a search on any search engine, I guess, these days, even the smaller, customized, localized ones in different countries, depending on the keywords you put in, you get, along with algorithmic results, you get a bunch of sponsored results or advertisements on the same web page. And the main thing is that these advertisements are very closely related to what you were searching for. Okay. So looking at the motivation behind this whole scheme, first of all, we can see that this whole concept is really very appealing to the advertisers because in some sense, you've actually expressed your interest in what they're selling, on what they would like you to see. So the targeting for the advertisement is very refined and very precise. Also, what happens for the most common scheme used these days is that an advertisement is only charged for only when the user actually clicks on it. And further, in some sense, further noting his interest to actually see what you have to offer. There are a lot of other concepts that come into play and make this a really appealing scheme for the advertisers. Not really gonna focus on this for the purposes of this talk, but let's try to model sponsored search a little and see how we can understand it a little better. So let's say that you were searching for a keyword, you got your algorithmic results, which I'm going to forget. On the right side, you got your advertisements. What we're going to say is that this web page has a bunch of advertisement slots. And that's the way we're going to model where these placements go into the web page. So in this case, let's say that you had a web page and you have 2 advertisement slots to offer as a search engine. Now, what happens is that we have a bunch of advertisers. And I'm going to make the assumption that these advertisers have done their homework, have their own data, and they have an estimation of how much is receiving a click is worth to them. Okay? So, for example, this guy right here has estimated that getting a click by doing all the averaging or whatever they do from the web page is worth $1 to him. Okay? Is this clear? Of course, these values are not publicly known, but for our purposes, we'll assume that each and every one of them knows their own value, which is kind of tricky, actually, because sometimes the hardest part is actually understanding what a click is really worth to you, but that's a whole different topic. But let's just say that they have an estimate. All right, so what happens is that these advertisers, basically based on that estimate, they make a bid to the search engine. And the bid is basically stating the maximum amount they're willing to pay to actually receive a click from the search engine. Okay? Of course, this bid can be whatever they want. It can be lower than their value. I'm going to call this their value. It can match their value, or it can even be higher, although that you can understand has a lot of risk associated with it. Now, what happens is that the search engine basically runs a mechanism and does its thing, and basically allocates the advertisements that it selects on the web page. The user comes in, the search engine presents the web page to the user, and the user actually might click on one or potentially more of the advertisements on the web page, and that's the point where the search engine actually charges the advertisers whose placement was clicked upon. Okay, is everything kind of clear so far? So far, I'm not specifying any details on how this part is done, or even this part. How do we determine the prices? But in an abstract way, this is how things are done in, I guess, the vast majority of sponsored search auctions. All right. So, when let's say if the user clicked on the second ad, then that guy also got charged. Okay. So let's take a step back and let's examine some of the motivation behind all the different parties participating in this game. Well, first of all, the searcher would like to have, first of all, high quality results. And that, in some sense, also does not exclude the advertisements. Some users are very happy to actually find what they're looking for through an advertisement, especially if they're interested in buying something or anything like that. The advertisers, on the other hand, basically want to make money. Okay? So basically what they want is, let's say that the advertisers are selling something like, I don't know, a digital camera or something like that. They want people to actually buy their product at the minimum cost. And that cost, of course, includes the advertising cost. They want to be able to measure how their efficiency, how they're doing. The search engine, on the other hand, they want to make money as well, and potentially a lot of money. In that sense, if you think about it, one might say that, okay, they want to charge a lot for a click. That's not actually straightforward in the sense that if you charge a lot, you're also that doesn't mean that you'll actually get more. But loosely speaking, they want to get a lot of clicks from the end users, and they want to get a lot of money for producing those clicks. Also, it's really worth noting that in the whole process, they also want to try to make the user happy. Because more users means that making the user happy means that the user is going to come back, more users, more clicks, more money, I guess. So just a brief picture, I guess, behind the motivation of each participating party. And let me move on a little by giving some definitions. Please stop me if anything is not clear that will be useful to us, and try to see into more detail how the scheme actually works. All right. So what we basically have here is a game. And we have a set of players, which are going to be, in our case, the advertisers. We have a set of rules, which is going to be basically the mechanism that the search engine is going to use. We're going to see a couple of strategies that the players or the advertisers can follow in selecting their bid for the search engine. And payoff function or utility functions are going to talk about this. It's going to be basically a function that determines the benefit of each advertiser. Okay. Let me just move on to this. I hope that most people are loosely familiar with the notion of a Nash equilibrium. The notion of a Nash equilibrium basically says that given if you are at a situation where you have a Nash equilibrium, given the strategies of all the players, no player has an incentive to change what they're doing right now. Okay? So in our example, given all the bids for all the players, no player has any incentive to change their own bid. Okay? That means that they cannot get anything more by changing their own bid. Okay, I won't talk about dominant strategies for now. If you're familiar with it, that's great. All right. Looking back at the advertisement slots, of course, things would be much easier and simpler if all of the advertisement slots were the same. Okay, but this is not the case. And people have found, and I guess it's easy to realize that some slots are receiving more clicks. Okay, and for our purposes, let's just take the general assumption that slots that are higher on the web page get more clicks than slots that are lower on the web page. And this seems to be the case in reality. There have been some studies about this. Well, it's not, okay, the reference is not visible there. But basically what people have found is that this is normalized, of course, if, say, the first slot was receiving a number of clicks, then the second slot was receiving 73% compared to the number of clicks compared to the first slot. Okay? So we're going to make an assumption like this and assume that the slots have basically a click probability associated with them. I'm pretty sure I know what you're going to ask, but
measure the theta i's, right? When you have millions of clicks, I can measure the theta i's. How do I know they're advertisement independent?
Exactly. So they're not, obviously. Obviously, the probability that you get a click from an advertisement is not only dependent on where on the web page it's displayed, it's also dependent on the advertisement itself. Right, but these are, in some sense, these are averaged. Okay, even these are sampled, I guess, from the web pages and from the search engine. And in some sense, if you do have like millions of search queries, you can sort of do that. Even the search engine can do that if they wish. And I'm pretty positive they actually do, like by just rearranging the advertisement sometimes to get an idea of what's going on.
When you compute the probability of clicking on an ad, there is not only a relevance bias.
Exactly. Yes, you're absolutely right. I'm gonna come back to this. I think it's in a couple of slides. But for the moment, let's just assume that if all the advertisements were very similar, in some sense, then this is approximately what you would get. Okay? All right.
Can you tell us what the references for this
This is, I think, from Atlas Institution report, like it's a couple of years back. It's referenced in our paper if you would like to look it up. All right, so this is also, by the way, I'm going to come back to this, but these kind of rates are in a bunch of like empirical studies that have been done. They're pretty much accepted as the reality. All right. So I've already pretty much described that I'm going to assume that each advertiser has a value for receiving a click, and that they submit bids to the search engine. What I've just talked in the previous slide, I'm going to call it the click rate of the slot by theta there, and I'm going to assume the slots are ordered. If we have k slots, the first one is the top slot, which has the highest click rate, and they're sorted in that way. Okay. Let me talk a little about about the pricing scheme that the search engine might use, and some of the schemes that are currently used. So the first one that was introduced when this whole concept came out was charging the advertisers by just displaying their advertisement. Okay, this is what was called cost per impression or per mile sometimes, because it was usually charged over 1,000 impressions or something like that. I've pretty much talked about the cost per click, which is probably what you're most familiar with, and this is what is really widely used these days. But you can also imagine that, and this is also used, actually charging the advertiser upon a completion of a transaction. This is a little more technically challenging in the sense that the search engine not only needs to monitor like the clicks, but also needs to monitor what the end user is going to do at the advertiser's website. But this is possible, and it's actually used. All of these, though, are similar from our perspective. So for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to, like I've pretty much done already, I'm going to focus on just charging the advertisers per click. Okay? All right. Are there any questions about this so far? Okay, great. All right. So let me move on to some more definitions, just in terms of, I guess, introduction, and talk a little about the mechanisms that one could potentially use in actually determining the outcome of an auction. So actually, I'm not sure if this was actually used in practice. I believe it was for a little time. A really known mechanism is the generalized first price auction for this scheme. Basically, the idea is that once the search engine receives the bids, basically allocates the advertisement slots to the advertisers in the, by ranking the bids, by sorting the bids from highest to lowest. Yeah?
Are you assuming already a list of bids have been selected from the keyword?
What do you mean?
When you're doing this, you already have some selected list of bids,
Uh-huh.
because there are potentially millions of bids. So have you shortlisted according to the keyword?
Yes, the bids are actually the bids they were submitted from the advertisers for that particular keyword.
What if there are multiple keywords in the box?
I'm going to, for purposes of simplifying this, I'm going to ignore this and just focus on just this one keyword. Okay? In some sense, if you have multiple keywords, you could expand this and talk about each keyword separately. Okay? But that's actually a good question. In practice, you do have multiple keywords that you could be bidding on. But the idea is that for right now, just to look at the simplest case, okay? Let's assume that we're talking about a single keyword. We've received the bids, we're sorting them, and we allocate the slots in that order. And in the generalized first price auction, we actually charge each advertiser what they bid for. A natural different mechanism, which is potentially much better, is the generalized second price mechanism, in which the idea is pretty much the same, except in this case, we actually charge the advertisers whatever the bid of the advertisers below them was. Okay? This is a generalization of the eBay auction, if you're more familiar with that. And there's also this mechanism often called VCG. I'm going to refer to it as VCG. Basically, the idea, I don't want to go into the equation, but basically, the incentive, the idea behind this mechanism is that the price you're going to get charged is going to be, in some sense, equal to the harm that you're doing to the rest of the players. Okay? If you don't understand this, it's all right. Why are we even bothering with this mechanism? It's because this mechanism has this really nice set of properties. And going back to all of these mechanisms, which it's very easy to actually see that when we're talking about Nash equilibria, the first mechanism doesn't have any. But these two have. And moreover, if one were to actually use the VCG mechanism as a search engine, then it can be easily shown that this mechanism is truthful, and by being truthful, it actually means that the advertisers know their optimal strategy. They know that the best thing to do would be to actually bid their own value.
When you talk about Nash equilibrium, what's the goal of each of the players in this case? How they maximize?
That's maximizing their utility function.
What is their utility function?
I haven't defined it yet. You're absolutely right. And yes, you're right. Because yes, I'm pretty sure you can imagine what it would be. But you're right. For our purposes right here, these statements actually reflect a utility function, which is going to be your value minus the price you're going to pay for a click.
Value versus the price you're going to pay for each click.
Mm-hmm. So if you have an estimated value of, say, $1 and you're paying 70 cents, then you gain 30, basically.
But if
That's
you're
it.
using this utility function in particular, right?
Mm-hmm.
Supposedly, I can bid up to the value and I still benefit. So,
It's gonna become more clear. You're right. I haven't defined the utility function. It's gonna become more clear in a couple of slides where I talk about the utility function.
I thought the utility function, or the definition of the utility function for each player,
Right.
is actually the biggest problem in this problem space. Because
Yes.
basically, let's say for each player,
You're right. These statements. You're actually right. This statement reflects a very simple definition of the utility function, which I'm going to follow for the purpose of this talk. But at the end, I'll talk about this and how it's actually not that simple, and what other things actually might come into play. Are there any other questions?
So I have a question. So if there's only a single item, so BCG is just
Yes. If there's a single item, these things match. They're the same. But it's a much simpler problem if it's a single item. So yeah, I guess the beauty of it right now is that there are multiple items and they're not the same. Yeah.
So for BCG, you're assuming that I bid individually for each slot, or I just bid one, just give one price?
No. For VCG, I'm assuming that the players bid, and the mechanism allocates the slots to the bidders. It's actually going to allocate them in the same order as the other ones, and then it calculates this set of prices that it charges each bidder.
But there was a reference here to multi-commodity auctions. There, when you have multiple items in an auction, in the game theoretic version of an auction, wouldn't you bid separately for each item?
You could, but this is not really what really happens in this case. You can view them as separate items, but they're not unrelated items. Because basically, as an advertiser, if I'm making the assumption that you don't really care if you receive a click from the first slot or from the bottom slot, you actually care about getting clicks. Okay, so in some sense, it's this type of auctions. It's a middle ground between single item auctions and multi-item auctions, of having completely different objects where you might have very different valuations for each object. So it's kind of in the middle.
So you'll define the value later on in the talk?
I'm going to define the utility function. Right. Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Question?
Yeah.
Neither of these may be the best strategy for the search engine because he wants to maximize revenue.
Yes. Well. Okay. Now we're going to like real world problems, right? What does it mean for a search engine to maximize revenue? It's not straightforward as getting just the highest set of prices from the advertisers. In real life, you also have these issues. For example, I can make the argument by saying, okay, if a search engine used VCG, then potentially the advertisers could understand that it's in the best interest to actually bid their value. Okay, and maybe by bidding their value, you're actually, as a search engine, is going to get more, while in this case, it's not in their best interest to bid their value. And maybe the advertisers actually decide to bid far less, be more a little restrictive on their bids.
The point I had in mind is it's not necessarily the best for the search engine to sort in order of price, bid value.
Exactly, right.
Because they have to factor in the relevance.
Second thing is,
Second
point is number of slots on the right is much smaller than number of advertisers.
Yes.
So how do you prune advertisers or the ads? Because suppose there are 100 advertisers for a keyword, but there are 10 slots on the right margin.
Right.
So it's just like the top 10 get in and the remaining 90
Exactly.
don't.
Exactly.
Oh.
Okay. But you're. Let me skip this. Let me talk to exactly what you were talking about. And you're right that it actually, you shouldn't actually order the advertisers in the order of the bids and what actually happened, because you're absolutely right that it's also the quality of an advertisement that actually affects how many clicks that advertisement is going to get. And you, as a search engine, of course, you want a lot of people to actually click on this, and can be easily seen. And really a model that supposedly used in practice. By the way, I don't know how the search engines do things. Okay, and we can, at least us as researchers at the university, maybe you have better luck. But we can only assume by what we've been told, by what we can figure out. Okay, but what really happens, we don't know. Anyway, but coming back to this what's often called a separable model is that don't actually order the players in order of their bids, but actually order them by this product, which is their bid times the quality of their advertisement. And this is, I'm more familiar with Google and by their statements in their blogs and stuff like that, we understand that what they're basically doing is that for just a little fraction of their search queries, they're basically sampling the quality of advertisements by placing them all over the place, depending on what you actually bid. Just for like 1% or something like that, they basically reorder the advertisements in different random, I guess, ways, and basically get this estimate of how many clicks your advertisement got from being all over the place to actually estimate how good your advertisement is. And really quick example, if to see that, let's say that you had this case, you had just one slot to allocate, who would get it? And in this case, this player is bidding higher than this player, but it's actually, if you do the math, you can see that by following this sort of model, is that you would get more revenue as a search engine by allocating the slot just to this player. Okay. By the way, this is still a simplification, because it doesn't necessarily mean that the actual click probability of an advertisement in a particular slot can actually be modeled like this. But that's what we've learned that at least Google uses, and I think it seems pretty reasonable. Okay.
You don't have the slot bias in this expression yet, right? So there is another slot bias which you put at the very beginning. So here the CTR is dependent on the quality of the ad.
Right.
And then if it is put on a first position versus 10th, it's likely to be clicked more in the first position.
You're right. That's what I'm saying. It's still a simplification. It still doesn't necessarily model correctly the probabilities, but it's something that's used in practice. And by the way, since I've said it, afterwards I'm going to ignore it. Okay. All of what I'm going to talk about, the bidding strategies now, actually very easily can be done in this model, okay? But just for simplifying the talk, I'm going to assume that we only care about the bid. We only have the bid. And all of the advertisements are very similar, or they have the same factor, okay?
Basically here, assume the overall click-through rate is product two terms. The first term is only dependent on the slot. Second term is only dependent on the advertising. The ranking rule is only in terms of seconds.
Okay. All right. So finally, let me talk about some of the stuff we were working on. Okay. So going back to this model, like I said, we had the advertisement slots. We have our advertisers. Let's just say that the advertisers do their math, they have their values, and I don't know, they consult with their marketing department or whatever, they submit a bid, and I'm going to assume now that the GSP mechanism is actually used here. Why? Because it's the one used in practice, or at least it's our assumption that it's the one used in practice. So again, this mechanism sorts the bids and assigns the slots in that order, and it charges the bid of the player below. Let's just take a look at a quick example. What will happen in this case is basically the two players that were bidding higher, the highest bid would get the first slot, and the second highest bid would get the second slot. Is this clear so far? Okay. And then if the user actually clicks on these advertisements, then the first player gets charged the second highest bid, and the second player gets charged the third highest bid. Okay? All right. So I'm going to assume that these slots, like I've explained earlier, have an advertisement independent click probability, theta 1 and theta 2. Let's just make, oh, it's in the next slide, okay. So going back, I'm going to focus on this very simple utility function, which is not, I don't think it's very unreasonable. The idea for this utility function is, okay, how much are you getting? If you get a click, you get your value. How much are you paying? You're paying the price that was set for you, right? So your gain from that is going to be whatever is a specified amount. And then I'm going to, because all of these auctions are run continuously, doesn't mean that you'll get a click on each auction, but you can easily calculate what your expected utility would be by seeing at which slot your advertisement is. Okay? So in expectation, the gain of the advertiser is described by that function. Okay? Does this make sense? All right, quick example. Okay. Move too fast. The slot, that's an index. Okay? Quick example. Let's just focus on this guy. Okay? And what I've done here is basically just set some numbers here for the click probabilities of these slots. What's his utility function right now? 0. He doesn't. He placed his bid. He didn't get any slot. He's not going to get charged. He's not going to get a click. So it's basically 0. Is this the best thing he can do? Well, it kind of seems unnatural, right? I mean, he has a really high value, higher than this guy. So why is he bidding so low? I don't know. That's how he thought he should do it. But let's just say that he did something different. Let's just say he actually bid his value. What would be his utility at that point? Well, if he bid his value, he would actually end up getting the first slot, right? Because now it's the highest bid. And the second highest bid is going to be 1.1. Therefore, the price for receiving a click is going to be 1.1. And then being at the first slot would get you, well, in this case, a click with probability 1/2. So your expected utility from this situation is going to be 0.05. Is this somewhat clear? No, okay, so he's doing better than before. Is this the best thing he can do? Well, it turns out actually it's not. Let's just say that he bid something differently and decided to bid 90 cents. What would happen in this case? Well, it's easy to see in this case he would get the second slot because it's the second highest bid, and he would get charged 0.7 for its click. So in expectation, his gain from this situation, we'll do the math right here, it's going to be 0.15. Better than before. By the way, this is also a small example on why this mechanism is not truthful. I mean, you can see right here that it is not the best. His best strategy is not to actually bid his value, but he can do better by bidding something else. Is this example somewhat clear? All right. So things are not simple for the advertisers. It gets, as you can imagine, it can get complicated. Okay. What exactly to bid? And the thing is, though, that even by making these assumptions about what the advertisers are interested in, by the utility function and everything, if we knew what the other player would bid, then we can easily calculate what the optimal thing for us to do would be, right? If we could predict what the other bids would be, then we can basically consider all the possibilities, like bid to get the first slot, bid to get the second slot, and so on. And actually at each point calculate what my utility function would be. They actually select a maximum one. Okay? Problem is we don't. And what we're going to assume is for this set of bidding strategies that I'm going to focus on, we're going to make the assumption that the rest of the players' bids are going to remain the same as in the previous auction, in the previous round. Yeah?
Question I have on the problem definition.
Compared to second price auction, a lot of work has been done.
Right.
So what is the new thing for the ad word? Is it the theta x probabilities? So in the problem definition, what is the new aspect of the problem that comes from the context of
Actually, there isn't anything new in terms of how we define the model. And actually, I would make the statement that this model, what I've said so far, is actually the most common model used, at least the simplest one, at least in the research literature, okay, in terms of keyword auctions.
Not keyword auctions. I'm saying that compared to earlier research on second price auctions, not necessarily in the context of internet. So I'm trying to understand why people are attacking this new problem. What is the new thing in it compared to 10 years back? So is it just the theta s probabilities?
Well, there are a lot of things. First of all, a lot is known for the second price auction regarding a single item. We're talking about multiple items here, so hence it's a generalized second price auction. And secondly, like I was talking earlier, it doesn't fall on the other way of the spectrum, which is that you have a bunch of different items and each item has a completely dependent value for you. You have a set of items which you're basically getting the same qualitative, you're getting the same thing for each item, in just in different rates. So in that aspect, I'm not so sure how much work was done. I'm not familiar with work that was done really in the past about this, okay? Okay, going back to this, let's see. All right. So we're going to make the assumption that the players' bids are going to remain the same. It's not a very unreasonable assumption in the sense that one can imagine that there are keywords that you could have like millions of search queries every week or so. And it turns out that people actually, although they could, in theory, they could change their bid like every second, they don't actually do that. Either because they're too lazy or they don't have the means to actually have people updating their bids all the time or use an automated software to actually do it for them. So we're going to make this assumption. And given this assumption, now it's easy for the player to actually estimate where he should bid. So should he bid really high to get the first slot, or bid somewhere in here to get the second slot, or somewhere in here to get the third slot?
This is a very vastly simplified problem, right? I mean, ideally, this is automatic bidding software.
Ideally,
right?
yes. And
supposedly, everyone should be able to use that bidding software. I mean, so the actual competition will be something like this.
This is pretty much what we're going to focus on. The question that we're really going to answer at least for purposes of this research was what would happen if things are like that and everyone is actually trying to optimize their utility function as defined earlier, and everyone actually has an automated software like what you're talking about. What would become? What would happen? Okay, and this is what I'm going to talk about.
So if I'm the bidder, I don't know other people's bids, right?
And that's not necessarily true. So, okay, that changes, in practice, that sort of changes from system to system. Okay, and it used to be the case until a year ago that, for example, in Yahoo, you could see other people's bids. You could type in a keyword and you could see all the bids.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. You can still estimate it, though. And especially if you had an automated software, you can, in theory, you can basically change your bid and just watch what happened. And by looking at the prices you're going to get charged, then you can sort of estimate what you. Google gives you. You can also get an idea of what other people's bids might be. Google will give you an estimate. If you go to Google and you say, okay, I want to bid this much, it will tell you, okay, you'll end up in this range of slots. So if you sort of automate this, then you can, I'm pretty sure you can get a really good estimate of what other people's bids would be. But you're right, I'm going to make the assumption that the bids are publicly known to all of the players, okay? Which, you're right, but by the way, yeah, you're right, we're making a lot of assumptions, but we got to start somewhere, I guess, right? It's like, okay, let's just look at the simplest model that we can think of that seems reasonable. And then I'm going to talk afterwards, have a couple of slides on okay, how can we actually approach reality a little better? Last definition. All right. So yeah, I still haven't completely defined a bidding strategy. And the reason is, so far, what I've described is, okay, let's say that you see other people's bids. You assume that they're going to remain the same in the next round, and you calculate that the best thing for you would be to get the third slot. That means you can bid anywhere in this range. You would still get the third slot. You would still get charged 0.6, right? So nothing pretty much changes for you. So what should your bid be? And what we did is basically we defined 3 natural, at least to us, possibilities. One is basically bid as low as needed. You want to get this slot? Okay, bid whatever you have, like the smallest amount over 0.6, whatever the search engine permits you to bid. This is what we call altruistic bidding. Another approach is actually bid as high as you can. And the incentive behind this, why would you do this, is that basically try to make your competitor, because your bid actually, the only thing, by changing your bid in that range, what you're doing is basically you're setting the price for this player, right? So the incentive behind this strategy is like, is try to make your competitor pay more, make him lose money, okay? And is that reasonable incentive? Our impression is that it is, and it is actually used. I did some, I looked online to a bunch of different bidding tools that are advertised on the web. This sort of strategy actually seemed like it was there in a lot of the automated bidding tools, at least the ones that are that you can sort of buy, that are not built internally for a company or something like that. Okay. There is one issue, though, associated with both of these strategies, and that is the notion of how much risk are you taking by bidding with either one of these two. One could say that in this case, you're minimizing your risk as a bidder, because by bidding as low as possible to get, of course, the optimal slot, because you really want to optimize your utility function, even if the other player's bids change, the maximum amount you would pay would be 0.601. While on the other hand, what would happen here is that, okay, you're making this player pay a lot, close to what exactly he was bidding, but what happens if that player actually changes his bid and decides to lower it a little? You would end up paying as high as 0.799. And actually, going back to practice, again, I also found this sort of notion when looking for the automated bidding tools. There are automated bidding tools that basically try to detect if someone is doing that to you. If someone is bidding very close to what you're bidding and is making you pay a lot. And so in that sense, if you follow the second strategy, what we call competitor busting, because we found this terminology in one of those tools and we liked it, you're taking a risk as an advertiser. Another strategy, which is going to be the most interesting to us, it's what we call balanced bidding, is the following. The idea behind this strategy is bid in this range to optimize your utility function, bid high, but don't take the risk I just described earlier. And the idea here is bid as high such that if this player realizes what you're doing and tries to undercut you and make you actually pay close to what you're bidding, or exactly what you're bidding, which is the highest amount, of course, you can pay, then that should not hurt you. And that should not hurt you in the sense that, okay, you're paying more than what you're expecting, but this guy just dropped below you, so you're getting a higher slot. Okay? So if everything balances out by basically applying this equation, you solve for this bid right here, and you determine how high you should bid by following this strategy. And the question we asked was what I was talking about earlier. What happens if players are using these strategies? and they're using them in multiple rounds, in consecutive rounds. What would happen if people actually have like automated tools to actually enforce those rules and bid according to one of these rules? And I guess, as you can imagine, for the first two of the strategies, the news are not so great. It has been known that that is not our work, that fixed points for this system do not generally exist. So, to recap, if the players, all of the players are following one of the first two strategies, then the system would not reach a stable situation where the bids would remain the same afterwards. Okay? And it's also very unpredictable, like what would happen, where the bids would be. On the other hand, if all of the players are following this strategy, then a fixed point does exist. And even better, it's a unique fixed point. It's actually a point which is a Nash equilibrium, of course, as it's stable, but it's also an NV-free Nash equilibrium. I don't want to define this. It's just a stricter notion of a Nash equilibrium. It means the players not just happy. The players cannot get anything better by changing their bid. There are not envy of what other people are paying for the slots they're getting. And also the prices that the players are going to get charged at that unique fixed point match precisely the prices should the search engine were to actually use the BCG mechanism, and the players, of course, would bid their values, knowing that it's the BCG mechanism.
Question.
Yeah.
I noticed basically in this balanced bidding strategies, you bid high, right? But you consider that, the higher bidder will lower the bid.
Right.
To force you to be a upper slot. So
Right.
you have this equation.
Right.
There should be potentially another equation, right? You want to bid high so that if the lower bidder increase the bid, you'll not get all the bid. If you have that equation, because if you're at the lower slot, your utility function is basically zero. Because let's say if I have two slots, you are trying the second slot, the third slot have a delta S of 0. You cannot risk that.
What I'm saying is, if one of the lower players, in particular this guy, raises their bid, you're not getting anything better. You're going to lose. In fact, if they start raising their bid, this slot might not be the optimal slot for you anymore.
So that's why I'm wondering why it's still a fixed point. If it's basically this happens, everyone will increase their bid.
No. What I'm saying here is that the unique point, fixed point exists if all of the players are following this rule.
If all of the players following this particular rule, right? And
If one of the players starts misbehaving, saying by doing something different, then all bets are off. You can't predict what's going to happen. But let me just explain one more thing. We're basically under the assumption that generally the bids are going to remain the same. What I'm saying here is that by raising your bid, you're harming this player. And what would happen if this player reacted to this? You're not really affecting any of these guys. So I'm still under the assumption that these guys also don't have any sort of incentive to actually change their bids at that point.
In this particular equation, are you trying to basically, for example, after one round, right, you know your position, you know everybody's bid, right? Then you are trying to increase the bid for the next round to basically satisfy this equation, right?
You can view it that way, or you can view it like the moment you actually decide that you want to get this slot, then you immediately bid there. You don't necessarily start bidding here and then start trying to increase it. Although you could do that as well.
So my question is, for example, let's say I have two slots. I'm the third guy in this particular case. I'm going to basically try to outbid the second guy.
Okay.
Right, certainly that's your case, right?
If you have two slots, you're trying to outbid the second player. then by following this rule, what you would basically bid is bid as high, such that if something changes and you end up paying what you bid, but at the same time you actually got the first slot, then it should do you no harm. You can only benefit from it. That's what I'm describing. There are a lot of different strategies that one can apply here. I mean, it's a range, right? You can bid anywhere in that range. It's just we try to look at what would be the incentives of the players, like what would happen. And by following this rule, what we're basically capturing is that at least for this part of the players, the upper part, if they decide to drop their bids and you end up paying more than you were expecting, but at the same time, should these players drop their bids, then you're getting at least one better slot, potentially even more, then you can only benefit from this.
Just maybe you can basically tell me you should have another part of the story, basically to risk not being underbid, basically not being overbid by someone. So I mean, in this case,
if you do get overbid, if one of these players, let's say you're bidding somewhere in here, and one of these players decides to bid above you, then of course the whole thing changes. You have to recalculate now what your optimal slot would be.
So basically, I think that the bidding strategy is basically more or less like this. I mean, after the previous round, right, you have, let's say, n slot. You find the optimal slot you want to be. If not when no one changes.
Right. Precisely.
And in that case, you potentially can bid in the range. But you are trying to see if there's risk for you to overbid or under. Right. So basically, I mean, it's like this. Let's say you have 10 slots. You have 100 people. In the last round, each one bid something. You have 10 winners. In the next round, every 100 people can look at this 10 slot and basically, according to their values, and basically estimate a slot range they want to bid.
Okay. Yeah. Right. I'm making the assumption that the players in general are estimating the optimal slot, and they have this range where they're going to bid. Exactly. But what?
I mean, I have basically my two observations is this. It seems to me you don't not only want to basically consider a bit high, you also want to consider a bit low equivalence.
I'm not sure I completely understand exactly what you're trying to say. Can we talk a little more about this afterwards? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, but basically going back to this, what we're saying here is that with this bidding strategy, yeah.
So I'm confused a little bit about the relationship of this slide to the previous slide you showed about first price, second price, and this BCG.
No. Yeah.
So there you showed that the first two, actually the first one does not have a Nash equilibrium, the second two do. This is an example, this is a generalized second price thing.
Yes.
Right? Okay, so it would have a Nash equilibrium, but here you're saying that it only has, some, depending on your bidding strategy, some of them have an equilibrium and some don't. And then the other column was truthfulness or not, and you said that...
yes, so the generalized second price mechanism has equilibria, actually has a range. It's not just one, a unique point, it has a range of equilibria. But But given, let's say that you start the system, you have your first auction, the bids are arbitrary or something like that, okay? You're obviously not going to be in a Nash equilibrium. What I'm saying is that if the players start following this rule, and round after round, they look at the previous round, and they alter their bids, then this system actually converges to something. Actually, this is what I'm going to prove. But what this statement is saying is that there is this point where, should the bids find themselves at this point, the players have no incentive to change their bids.
That's a Nash equilibrium.
That's a Nash equilibrium.
Okay. So,
okay.
But if you don't follow the BD strategy, then
Right.
Okay.
That's
So you made a statement earlier that there exists a Nash equilibrium for the generalized second price options.
Yes. Yes.
But does it mean only if you're using this bidding
No,
strategy?
what I'm saying is that, okay, it might be a little confusing because the Nash equilibrium is really defined by the set of prices, not exactly by the set of bids. What I'm saying is that if let's say that you're in a Nash equilibrium, the bids are in such a way such that you're in a Nash equilibrium, okay? Let's just focus on one player. If the player decides to change his bid according to one of these two strategies, then you're not, in the next round, he's going to change his bid. Okay? And you're not going to be in a Nash equilibrium anymore. That's what I'm saying. So generally, if the players are following the first two strategies, you're not going to get into a situation where it's a Nash equilibrium. The thing about the Nash equilibrium is that there's this greater than or equal. So let's say that you have your bids, right, and like this, and this is a Nash equilibrium. Let's just say I set them that way. It's the first round, and by accident you find yourself in that situation. Then this player will look what's happening, and he'll realize he cannot do any better by changing his bid. That means he doesn't want another slot. But he realizes, hey, I'm right here. I want to be second. Okay, I can be second by bidding anywhere in here. I'll just bid up here by following competitor busting, let's say. It's not a Nash equilibrium anymore. This player would be really unhappy. He will try to do something else now. But what I'm saying with the balance bidding rule is that should the players find themselves in a Nash equilibrium, they'll stay there. Meaning the bid that is going to be calculated by that equation right there is going to give you exactly the right bid to stay in a Nash equilibrium. Let me.
I mean, basically, let me say this.
Yeah.
And let me see if the statement is correct or not. If you are running this generalized second option,
Mm-hmm.
you have basically n players, meaning 100 players, 10 slots.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm saying the Nash equilibrium is basically this. You sort everyone's true value. Okay. Take the 10 toppest one. Each one bid just a little bit higher, or basically bid the second one's price value. Meaning, for example, everyone. I mean, let's say you have 100 basically
Right.
advertisers. They have basically certain values.
Mm-hmm.
And basically you calculate out the actual value of each one.
You can find, if you're looking for a Nash equilibrium, to find a Nash equilibrium, it's very easy. You just run the BCG mechanism, and whatever that gives you.
I mean, basically, I'm observing. I mean, basically, I'm arguing that the thing I propose is a Nash equilibrium. And can you find me a different Nash equilibrium?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that that's a fixed point. I think Nash equilibrium is a static notion of equilibrium. At that point, there's no.
That's
What he's saying is a dynamic thing. It's a fixed point. Like how do they act?
Precisely.
Yeah, but what I'm basically observing is this. If you basically have a different operating point on this, you can always increase. So basically, any other point is not a Nash equilibrium.
I think for this one, probably there are many Nash equilibrium.
Yes, absolutely.
Many Nash equilibrium. So the point is why, how would you do dynamically? And Nash equilibrium is a static motion, right?
Yeah.
At that point, there's no point for you deviating from it. You wouldn't increase your payoff, but may make you equal payoff, right? So maybe you want to deviate a little bit. Deviate a little bit may make some others unhappy, and then they will do something different. So there's dynamic thing going on. I think fixed point here is probably a stronger thing than just saying the Nash equilibrium. It doesn't capture the dynamics. This captures it.
Exactly. Let me just try to explain it one more time using this example. If you this player is bidding, say, 10, this player is bidding 7, and this player is bidding 3. And
Just use just 3 players.
right, and let's say there are 2 slots, right? And let's just say I set the numbers right, and this is a Nash equilibrium. No one can do better.
So I'm saying that this Nash equilibrium is basically this. The first one bid 7,
Right?
the second one bid 3. And
No.
Okay.
Potentially it's not. Because if the first player bids 7, you're saying, let's make this guy bid 7, this guy bid 3, and the other guy is still bidding 3?
I mean, the other guy, he cannot bid anything, so his bid is, doesn't matter. He lose anyway. The third guy lose anyway.
Well, not anymore. Potentially, maybe he's.
So you can
Well,
basically
actually-
create a strategy for each one to improve.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe this is still a Nash equilibrium. I'm not. Yeah, there are tons, like an infinite number of Nash equilibria that you can find. I was going for a very simpler one.
Can you find me another Nash equilibrium? So I found one, right?
Yeah. I was going for a simpler one. Say this player just changes his bid a little, makes it like 6.5. Could potentially still be a Nash equilibrium. I mean, this player might making that much.
If this guy is bidding 6.5,
Mhm.
the other guy can bid lower and improve upon his utility. So
Who?
that is not a Nash equilibrium.
Who can bid lower?
Basically, in my example, I'm basically saying first one bidding 7, second one bids 3.
Right.
This is a Nash equilibrium. Can you give me another example of a Nash equilibrium in this basically simple system? 3 bid, 2 slot.
Yeah, what I've described here. This player can change his bid, and basically this player, if 3 is really the value of this player, which is we are going to assume.
That's basically my assumption. The value of each player is 10, 7, 3.
No, I'm not making this assumption. I'm saying these are the bids.
No. I'm saying the value of each player is 10, 7, and 3.
Right.
And their bid of this Nash equilibrium is 7 for the first player, 3 for the second player.
Yeah, this could be a Nash equilibrium. You're right.
Can you find me a different Nash equilibrium in this system,
Yes.
please?
Okay, so we're saying that the values are like this. Well, maybe depending on the rates, then this guy bids, let's say that this player bids 6, and this player bids, 4. And this player is still bidding 3.
Okay.
This could potentially be a Nash equilibrium. Yeah?
Basically, let me basically take a look and basically see. Okay.
The fact that this is lower than this doesn't mean anything. Okay?
Basically, my observation is this.
Uh-huh.
For the second player, when he bids lower,
Uh-huh.
his utility improves, right? So if
This
you lower,
player?
yeah.
No, he's still gonna get
Oh,
charged
he's
3.
still gonna get charged 3, okay.
Yeah. So
let me see,
his
okay.
bid only affects this, the price for this player.
But for the bid of 6,
The bid of 6 needs to be high enough so that this player wouldn't get more because now you can potentially say that since his value is 7, he could bid higher than 6 and get the first slot. That doesn't mean it's the best thing for him to do.
because that depends on basically the probability of the.
Exactly. It depends on the rates. It depends on how much he's paying for the second slot. All that. There's tons of things for Nash equilibria. But what I'm saying right here is that there is this point, basically, where if the players find themselves in that situation, then and they set the bids at the next round following this rule, they're going to stay in that situation. It's going to be a fixed point. While it's not necessarily true for these two strategies. Okay? Okay, really ran out of time, I guess. So a unique point exists. The question that we basically answered is, do we get there? Okay, a unique point exists doesn't mean that the players will bid at that unique point to begin with. They might not even know what the unique point is, not knowing other people's values. And basically what we've managed to prove is that the players actually can get there. In fact, if they're following this timing model where not all of the players bid at the same time, then the system will always converge to that unique fixed point. Yeah.
So you're saying in every round, only one bidder applies BD.
Exactly.
Others don't change.
Don't change the bids.
And in next round, somebody else applies.
Exactly. Randomly selected player. That's just the timing model that
And
we
that's
use.
what you mean by asynchronously?
Exactly. That's what I mean by asynchronously. Only one player has the opportunity to change the bid at its round. Which, in some sense, like at least the economics people that we've worked with say that this is more reasonable in terms of reality, because really when you have like millions of searches going on, you don't really have the. It would be, you know, very unlucky if you had more than one player actually changing the bid at the same time.
This is a software.
Yeah, if this is a software, that could happen. Okay, so I'm really running out of time, so I should just try to speed this up a lot. Okay, some of the incentives, I'm not going to focus on this. This is just a picture of what will happen what's the problem with the other timing model, the other natural one, which is at every round, everybody gets to adjust their bid. What will happen is, this is the sort of situation, this is actually really nice, because when we first started this work, we actually thought that this timing model actually converges too at the fixed point. But we've set it up in some simulations, and you know, after a couple of tries, we saw this happening. And we realized, yeah, I mean, this could happen. And the idea is, let's say you find yourself, you start in this situation, bids are kind of low, these three players decide, hey, I want to get the first slot, I want to bid higher than this player. So they all together move their bids high, and now they realize that the prices are really high now. I mean, and they decide, oh, now I want to be the last player winning a slot. I'm assuming there are 3 slots right here, and this player is just losing all the time. He doesn't want to change his bid. So they find themselves back to the first point and keeps going. Okay? And actually, we have a reference in our paper. There are indications that this thing actually happens in practice too. And what was really weird about this is that, like I said, we found it through simulations. It wasn't a constructed example. We were, looking at the board and trying to make the numbers just bad enough to get this. This actually came up with like 10-15% of our simulations, where the 10-15% refers to how having the initial bids be random. Okay? So what I'm saying is the same set of players could reach the fixed point if their starting bids were different. Actually, you can make the starting bids exactly at the fixed point and they would stay there. Okay? So, but there is a 10-15% chance that if the bids are selected randomly in such a way that you would get in one of these loops. Okay? Okay, I have a couple of slides for the more theoretically inclined people, which I'll just skip. This is just a sketch of the proof, how in the synchronous model, the bids basically behave like this. And we managed to prove that we actually reach the fixed point and then the bids remain the same by proving that splitting the proof basically into 2 phases. In the first phase, we prove that the losers, the ones that do not end up getting slots, basically start bidding their values and stay there. And then in the second phase, we managed to prove that the winners actually sort themselves just right and start bidding at the fixed point.
What about number of rounds of convergence?
Our proof, unfortunately, actually we have done improvements since we first published this. It's still, in the general case, it's still exponential, our proof. Our simulations indicate that it's actually polynomial in the number of players. Actually, in the number of slots, which is less than the number of players. Actually, our simulations really suggest something like n squared. But for the purposes of our proof, we only have an exponential bound, and the reason is we're doing it this way, basically. We're defining this sort of stable set, And we managed to prove that this stable set increases. It's a bit vector, basically, and we managed to prove that it can only, after a fixed number of rounds, it will change. It must change. And once it changes, it can only change to something which is lexicographically greater. So immediately you can see that by putting these two things together, you get a proof that eventually your vector will be all ones. But it's exponential because there are 2 to the n different vectors. That's the...
Suppose I'm a player in this game
And I can only do BB. That's the rules of the game.
Right.
Why don't I just compute BCG prices and converge in one round?
Well, first of all, you might, you don't know the values of the other players. So, and I don't know, for any other reason, you might not actually want to do that. But I think, yeah, the main problem is you don't know the values of the other players, yes. And actually, to tell you the truth, like this balance bidding rule, there's a different equation that you can use that comes from basically what you were saying. In our first attempt, the strategy we came up was by sort of reverse engineering VCG, trying to see how you can calculate the bid in second price mechanism to give you the outcome of the VCG. And then we found this paper by Michael Schwarz and Edelman, basically, where they had this balance bidding where it realized it's the same thing, what we were doing and what they have done. So anyway, this was just a quick sketch of the proof. It's exponential.
So they don't have any results on convergence?
This is joint work with them. But when we realized that we were doing the same thing, we met up, yeah. But they had defined the strategy and they had a conjecture that this actually happens, that it would reach the fixed point. They didn't have a proof, so this is basically what we did. All right, we did a bunch of simulations, which I'm going to skip these things. I'll just, for 1 second, just mention this. And this is a look at the revenue, basically, how much revenue the search engine would make. And we're looking at the, okay, this is the revenue normalized to 1, where 1 is the revenue the search engine would make from the VCG, or if all the players are following the balance bidding strategy and reach the fixed point. It's the same, like I've described earlier. This is more motivated by the question, why do the search engines even use second price in the first case? And one of the potential answers is that they could make more revenue by second price than if they were using VCG. By doing the simulation, we're assuming that the click rates are following a geometric rate, which is actually very close, matches the empirical study, if this rate is around 0.7. So in around this case, we see that basically if you look at the entire range of Nash equilibria, which can be found analytically, then the potential revenue that the SSRG could make is not really that much higher. It's only the area of like 10-15% if the players do not bid over their values. This is the debt averse Nash, which is an assumption that we find very reasonable. We have a hard time believing that players would bid really over the values. This is very risky. You could end up losing, right? There's also the maximum Nash, which is, okay, if you also allow the players to actually bid over their values, what will happen? This was fairly interesting to us. All of these are in the paper. You can look at the slides if you want later to find them.
This is all assuming basically the gaming.
Sorry?
The search engine is using
The revenue, right. This is basically what we have here is that we've set a number of slots and we've set a number of players, and we follow a we pick a distribution for the values of the players, and then we sample over that and try to.
The naming rule here is generalized second price auction.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Now, I mean, for this basically auction, I noticed this. If you have basically X number of slots, actual player in this game is actually only X. So, for example, if you have 100 advertisers, you have 10 slots. It is all these top 10 advertisers,
Right.
which is basically doing all the interesting bidding.
And the 11th, because he said in the last price.
What the 11th do is set its price,
Right,
to
right.
its value,
Right.
and set a bottom line for everyone
Right.
to make sure
Yeah.
search engine earns a good
Although
percent.
that is the case in the fixed point, but until you reach that fixed point, the bottom players might be changing their bids and getting slots in the meantime and everything. Yeah.
But all the bottom player is not basically, I mean, they're not having any fun.
You're-
in this
you're
auction,
right.
I mean,
Yeah.
because, I mean, just like look at your previous experiment. I mean, that guy, I mean, set the bottom price.
Yes,
Really
yes. And
doesn't do anything.
they stay there, yes. Actually, the balance bidding rule actually tells them to bid their value, which is fairly reasonable if they're losing. Yeah. All right, so just really ran out of time. Okay, I want to say just a couple of other things we're working on. Just I'm going to just splash them on the screen. We're doing some work. Okay, so like I said, we assume that we had full information about other people's bids, that we can see them. What happens if you don't get to see them? There are a lot of different directions where this whole bidding strategies thing could go, and there are a lot of issues that arise in practice with people having advertising budgets, building on multiple keywords, caring about the different utility function, in particular this return on investment, if you're familiar with it. What would happen in, what sort of bidding strategy would you need to follow? What would be a good bidding strategy? Smarter strategies. So, by the way, before showing this slide, if the other players are following the balance bidding strategy, for you the optimal thing to do is following the balance bidding strategy yourself for one round. It's not the optimal thing to do if you look ahead in the future. And here's just a quick example. Just looking at this picture. Basically, if you're this guy and you try to play smart, and you know everyone else is following balance bidding, raise your bid. You make this guy pay a lot. He realizes he wants to go somewhere else. And let's say he drops. So predicting that, you grab that slot at a much lower price than you would be able to get it. The other guy realizes what you've done. He goes back up. You let him settle down and you repeat. Basically, this is just, yeah. So if the numbers are right, you can actually make benefit out of this. So this is just to say that it's the optimal thing to do. Just looking at the next round, it's not the optimal thing to do if you start thinking about time period.
So this Nash Equilibrium is just Nash Equilibrium.
Yeah.
One round of game.
Exactly.
Not the whole.
Exactly. But yeah, Nash Equilibrium actually, the way it's defined, is talking about a static situation. It's not talking about what would happen over a period of time, right? Okay, this was just a remark that you can come up with really smart things if you think about it. Some other research we're doing is looking at different mechanisms. I don't want to go a lot into it, but our idea is the following: because people care about clicks, impressions, and conversions, and they care about them in different ways, not necessarily the same way. Perhaps you can define a new mechanism that actually takes bids in multiple dimensions. A multidimensional, basically, bidding mechanism where someone can bid in clicks, and some other guy bids in impressions, and some other guy bids on both. And get all of these bids, but still come out with just this single list of advertisements on a web page and a single list of prices. Which prices, actually, you can potentially split them in many different ways, and you can charge one player for the bids he's receiving, the clicks he is receiving and another player for the impressions. This is actually what I'm working really like these days. Okay, and yeah, we've managed to prove a couple of things. We're also doing simulations. What?
So certainly, I mean, you look at many of the different aspects.
Yes, yes.
Can you summarize a few key results? I mean, you so far reached. I mean,
Well, regarding the bidding strategies, is pretty much what I've described there. We've done. This is still unpublished, so. Actually, it's a work in progress. I don't want to say too much about it. Not in the sense that I'm not really sure of what exactly we'll keep out of all of this. We have done some work on this. This is basically trying to make the utility function better. And basically, the idea here is that if you're placing an ad, the value that you're getting from an ad could be different by what other advertisements are also displayed in a page. If you're Sony, maybe you don't want your ad to be displayed next to Philips, say, or something like that. Maybe then you wouldn't be getting a lot of clicks. Or maybe if you realize that if people actually saw your competitor, you wouldn't be getting a lot of conversions because people would be checking out your competitor as well. Or there are a lot of ways to think about this. But we have this model basically where we try to get a good estimate on the utility function, which is dependent on what other advertisements are displayed on the web page. Is this accurate? We don't know. We did our best. This is, okay, that was it. All right, so yeah, it's noon. I'm sorry I ran so much over time, but it was a good conversation. So if you have any finishing questions.
Any more questions will come in the afternoon.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, all right.
Thanks a lot for that.
thank you very much.
Thanks.